Welcome everyone to another episode of FiST Chat, the vodcast that features discussions on the topics of film, science and technology. My name's Ben Warner and I'm joined again by my good friend Steve Kern. How you doing there, Steve?
Hi everyone, I'm doing fine. Very well, thanks.
Oh, fantastic.
Looking forward to tonight.
Absolutely. And we're on to episode 24 and we're going to be continuing our discussion from last week, which was on Windows 8, but we're also going to be talking about the recent announcements that Apple made on mainly software announcements, and it'll provide a nice contrast with what we were talking about last week. So I guess what do we got here? We've got iCloud, iOS 5, and a cheap lion by the look of it. So it's all interesting, but the one thing that struck me was, do you think maybe, given the other services that are on offer by, say, Google, Microsoft, whoever, that maybe Apple was just playing a bit of catch-up with this?
Oh, I think that's definitely the right answer there, Ben. I mean, at first I thought maybe Apple were really caught napping, with their head in the clouds, so to speak. But when I actually looked into Lion and their new operating system, what they're doing, it's not that different, for instance, to Windows 8. But the thing is that the actual UI, the user interface, really, I think, is a lot more comprehensive on Windows 8. And I think that's where probably it's just the actual user interface itself where Apple's behind. I think tech-wise and what they aim to do, they're both pretty much identical.
Yeah, I think starting with Windows 7 in particular, they kind of got to a stage where they're sort of there and there as far as software is concerned. But, I mean, there's still a lot of interesting things there, like Lion, for example, the multi-touch gestures, which, to be honest, I think actually works best in on a laptop because the trackpad's built into the laptops now. Yeah. So, and I kind of like the idea that you can sort of swipe screens, which to me is kind of a good idea that they've incorporated from the iPad. They've obviously taken a look at how some of those things work and seen if they can incorporate it there. On the flip side, though, you can only really call it an evolutionary sort of update. You look at it, there's some things in there that are interesting, but really you could still be using, like Snow Leopard or even Leopard, and still be kind of getting away with a lot of the same kind of work.
Kind of getting away. I think you'd still get away with it. They're both good operating systems. But, it's interesting you say that. After 2 decades of expecting Apple to build something amazing, now they're really concentrating on I guess, the cloud and getting devices to work together. And that means either one of two things, and it might be a combination of both. One is quite simply that we don't have the materials or the technology now to take the next step with computing. We've spoken about that when talking about the iPad, in terms of functionality. But also it shows a huge shift in I guess, where these companies are, whether it's Google or Microsoft or Apple. They're just trying to basically stitch us all up into the cloud. And I don't know if I like that, Ben.
Well, I'm certainly no fan of the cloud service myself. I don't see myself really using it, and I mean, it's kind of nice in theory that you got multiple devices and then you can sync up all your data, your documents, music, whatever, into the cloud, and no matter where you are, you can access it, and it doesn't matter what device you have.
And the great thing is that anyone that hacks the system can do that as well. So
we'll just hope Apple's got better security safeguards than, say, Sony, for instance. But it's interesting, and I'm sure there will be people out there that will get a lot of use out of it. The iTunes Music Match service, I don't know if you saw that as well. It was being reported that that's kind of like a piracy ceasefire type of arrangement where, Apple's saying to anyone who's downloaded pirated music, all right, we'll draw a line in the sand. You pay us $25 a year and will copy over your pirated music with our high quality MP3s or whatever that they're using, and you can use those. So it's kind of like getting a bit of money out of anyone that might have pirated music in the past.
Oh, look, I completely agree. And what's interesting about that is that's originally where the cloud came from, was so that there were no physical copies for people to rip off and pirate. And it's interesting. I reckon that that's one area where going down this path will probably pay off for Apple. Things that are priced properly in the iTunes store, easy to get. You know, it's just a file that you don't even have possession of. It's stored somewhere else. Why would you resort to pirating?
Yeah, exactly. And they're inexpensive anyway, so...
Exactly. And it's about time that a system came up that made pirating unattractive.
Yeah, absolutely. What else was there? There was iOS 5, which obviously runs Apple's portable devices, the iPhone, iPad, and iPod. Again, we mentioned before that, they might be playing a bit of catch-up with this. A lot of the features that they've announced in iOS 5 were already available in other comparable platforms. The notification center, for example, from what I'd heard, I haven't got an Android phone, but apparently all of the notifications in Android have been in there already for quite some time, and Apple's just sort of introduced it. It's getting a bit nitpicky, but it kind of... it goes to the point that I always thought about Apple, is that I love their products. I've obviously I see myself going forward and staying in their ecosystem, but that's mainly because I really appreciate their entire, the feeling of using their hardware, software, and all of that. But I do sort of draw the line when I hear the Apple fanboys referring to anything that they make as almost like the second coming, and it's technical perfection and whatever else. And this is a case in point, that Apple isn't really leading in this instance, because a couple of other companies have already done some of these things, but it doesn't matter either. It's okay for Apple to do that. They don't have to be, the ones in the front all the time. And I think if they were the ones in the front all the time setting the agenda, it might get a little boring out there in tech land.
Well, maybe. I've been waiting for 20 years for the rest of the world to catch up to Apple, but I think this is it. I actually believe Microsoft have probably pipped them with Windows 8, and for the first time are probably ahead. And, just getting back to what you're saying, functionality of the operating system for Lion, for instance, and iOS 5, I think the truth is that really now, once upon a time, probably everyone used the full function of a PC, and that might only have been limited to do a bit of word processing, some email, maybe some basic graphics or some basic games. But now there's so much power and so many apps, we don't use most of them. We probably don't use most of the suite of tools that are there. So you're quite right. If something's not included, it's not necessarily a big deal. What's more important is the functionality, and Windows 8 definitely has that functionality that's a step ahead of the competitors. And I'd like to see what you think, Ben, because people being stuck into Windows 8, particularly the Apple fanboys, of which I, a long time ago, used to be one, people being stuck into Windows 8, why do you think that is?
It's because I think if they pull it off, what they're proposing may be, a little bit scary. I think, it's shaking up the status quo a bit, because I mentioned this last week that the Windows UI, even though obviously Apple pioneered the graphical user interface, if we're just talking specifically about the Windows interface, there with the start menu, that really started in Windows 95, and it hasn't changed since. It's still the same thing. And now the only way that they can feel they can innovate is to really go right away from that. And they've kind of been forced to, because, you got things like, the iPad is going nuts, sales-wise. They've obviously recognised there's a market there, but they need to differentiate themselves, to make themselves relevant and continue to make themselves relevant. I mean, it's been fascinating, like reading articles and also listening to some podcasts where people are talking about some of the reactions that Apple guys have, and even Windows guys have as well, saying that a user interface like that, you can't make an operating system that suits all devices. And it's like, well, why can't you do that?
Yeah.
The proof is in the pudding. They haven't delivered this yet, so it's all a what-if scenario. But assuming if they did, it's going to be quite a breakthrough for them. And it's something that's quite interesting because I always think that their approach seems to be from the top down. They've built the user interface on top of the existing PC operating system with Windows, whereas with the iPad, Apple's built from the ground up from a mobile interface, and that's where I think a lot of the limitations of the iPad are coming from. And as far as I'm concerned, Apple really needs to work out a way to make the iPad user interface, even if they do maybe a slightly different version for the iPad, to figure out a way to make it like a more multitasking, more powerful type of device. Because at the moment, I still look at it as if it's still like a big iPhone or a big iPod. I can do everything.
A big toy.
Yeah, or a big toy. I can carry my iPhone around in my pocket. It's quite easy, and I can do absolutely everything. I'm happy to read books on it. I'm happy to listen to my music. I'm happy to watch video on it. I'm not going to carry around something that's in effect as big as a laptop when it can't give me the functionality of a laptop.
Look, I agree, and the other thing I'd put to that as well is that, I think Apple could quite easily, and they've sort of approached it that way with Lion, although they didn't go the whole hog, but Apple could easily make a one-stop operating system. But they may have taken an easy way out. They might have just not considered it because they've got everything synced up in the cloud, and they're pushing every Apple user towards the cloud for storage, apps, and I guess access.
Yeah.
Then really you don't need a one-stop operating system. But where this is different is exactly as you say, the approach. So Microsoft now are building something. It'll work on a phone. It'll work on their laptops and systems. It'll be highly functional and highly accessible. And while sure it fits in cloud, the thing that I really like about it is it's not necessarily dependent upon the cloud. And that's because they don't have a hardware base, as you've often pointed out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the other elephant in the room, I guess, is that we haven't really touched upon as much is Google as well, because they're trying to vie for some market share here as well. And I walked into a store the other day and I saw a laptop running Android for the first time. It was made by Acer as well, who they made the Iconia tablet. And I found that quite interesting. It had the touch screen, but it also had the keyboard. But I guess looking at it, for my personal preference, I look at what Apple offers with, say, the iPhone and even the iPad, and I look at what Windows and Microsoft are offering in terms of the Windows Phone software and now the Windows 8 user interface that is presumably going to go on their tablet. And they're very different from each other. So that nice contrast, I would be happy to have either one of those or even maybe both if, the budget allows, if I can play around with both of those. But I don't really have that same sort of feeling for like an Android tablet or an Android phone. So it should be interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, Android's doing really well. They've got a lot of market share, and I don't think Apple's going to challenge that because they're insisting on only releasing one phone instead of multiple phones. So it's an interesting, sort of thing to look at, how each of these corporations fare in this, this fight to get this market share. And maybe they're just going to have to be happy with sort of getting a percentage of it each.
Well, we've never seen anything like this before, personal computing. And I remember being absolutely happy late last century, deliriously so, when Apple and Microsoft finally decided to make Word documents completely compatible.
Yeah.
Okay? That was a great day. Are we going to see that happen again? Because this is really going to make my life tiresome, and it's going to force me to choose. And I might not choose Apple if I have to live in Apple's cloud.
Yeah.
I mean, why can't I have a Windows device and live in Apple's cloud? Why? I mean, I know I can, but they're not going to give me all the features unless I have Apple hardware or an Apple operating system. You know, same with Google. I might like the Android application. You know, why should I be forced to make a choice? Why can't all three live in harmony then?
Well, that's all corporate, unfortunately. They all want to be number one, but I guess we'll have to wait and see how it all pans out.
Well, I've already said it, Ben. You know, if they all want to be number one, that means that only one of them, maybe two, will survive. But there's no room for three.
Absolutely. But I think at any rate, with all the way, I think, even though it's sort of unclear how things are going, there are a lot of exciting things there. There are a lot of things that you can do these days that you couldn't do even like 5 years ago that are quite exciting. And it should be interesting to see how all of this pans out. So we might wrap it up there. So thanks again, Steve, for the chat. It's always interesting, and we'll no doubt return to this at some point.
Absolutely, and I'll just add to that you know, when that next round of hardware technology catches up, then we really will see these sorts of operating systems move into their own.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay. Well, that pretty much wraps it up for this week. We'll be back again next week. So until then, have a good week and catch you then.